Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Play Kirby Squeak Squad. In the last part we finished off not only Jam Jungle but also Volcano, and now we're on to World 6, Ice Island. Guess what the major mechanic is here? It's our ice level time. That does come with some of the usual Ice World things, namely some ice blocks that you can slip and slide on, but worth noting you can also use the ice blocks when they inevitably show up to change the element of both Tornado and Wheel to help you freeze water and the like. With that said, Ice Worlds in Kirby are also where usually they do a lot of the water level mechanics as well, if there's not an outright water world like there are in some other games. The ice blocks can be notably destroyed pretty easily with either no most attacks or even just sliding into them like that, and you want to do that to get to some items or chests along the way. But largely, you can also make them to use as platforms yourself in the case you want to avoid the water for one reason or another. So last time we started talking about the game's art team and all that, and we got about halfway through the main art team, but while we're in this level I figure I might as well finish them off before talking about another topic that we're coming up on. Next up on the art team is Mariko Kimizuka. They haven't worked on that many games compared to a lot of the other people on this list. They started on the art team for Kirby Campus Curse, then they were on the artwork for Squeak Squad here, as well as the first Pokemon Ranger. They were similarly in the artwork and design teams for Superstar Ultra, P-Cross 3D, as well as Kirby's Dream Collection, which I'm assuming was largely archival works. And that's all we know about them thus far. Also, this is the scroll ability for the Animal Kirby moveset. It's my favorite attack for the set. You jump and press B in a direction, and you just drill in that direction. If you can go either side directions or downwards, makes mining with it a lot faster and more intuitive than it is by default. I love this ability for Animal Kirby. The next person in the art team is Reiko Kawahara, who started on this game actually, then did artwork for Superstar Ultra, P-Cross 3D, Epic Yarn, Return to Dreamland, moving on to a lot of the modern HAL works, such as Triple Deluxe, the Box Boy series, and they're still doing artwork for Kirby Today and Dream Buffet and Forgotten Land alongside things like Smash Ultimate and all that, so they're still heavily involved in Kirby's art. And the final member of the main art team is Masayo Nakagami, who also started on this game and largely did a lot of the same thing I just mentioned, doing artwork for the series to this day, though they're more recently just in special thanks sequences like in Forgotten Land and Dream Buffet. Their last active credit on the art teams were for 2017's Bye Bye Box Boy, Kirby Clash Deluxe, Blowout Blast, and Battle Royale. Wow, they got 3 Kirby spinoffs out that year, huh? Man. I'm trying to think, outside of Mario's just all-encompassing genre deal, what was the last time we saw a series get that many games in one year? I guess technically Pokemon does it every here and there, depending on the spin-off, but, huh. So right there we got the ability scroll for Sword, which I never show off, but is perhaps the most interesting ability scroll in the game. What that does is that if you take the Sword ability and combine it with either Fire, Ice, or Spark on the bottom screen, you get an elemental sword Kirby that is just its own unique ability set. Its actual movements are the exact same, it's just that it'll have an element applied to it that can then apply that element state to whatever it would usually do, like electrifying the clouds in that one level, burning fuses with fire, freezing water with ice and all that. It's really cool, but I just don't really show it off in the LP for reasons of me often forgetting to. But this is the fully powered up Spark. I haven't talked about this ability scroll either. It allows you to charge up your Spark further, and at its highest, not only is it an absurdly large AoE, but it also sends a Spark forward where you're facing, so you can also hit something from long distance with it. It's not my favorite version of Spark. That probably goes to the Superstar Ultra adjacent variants of it, because it's just so malleable as an ability, and that full Kamehameha wave you can do with it's just so powerful, but this is a pretty good variant of it all the same. By the way, I love this song. This is probably my favorite song in the game that's not the Squeak Squad theme overall. There's a part of it that always reminds me of Rune Factory, though, specifically like Rune Factory 3. I think it's largely down to the instrumentation, but I love this song. Kirby, when it has very calming music rather than high-energy music, the calming music is some of my favorite in the franchise to begin with. I'm thinking of a specific song from 64 especially. So, the large chest this time around is a race to the center. Either you get there first and grab the chest and leave, or Spinny gets there first, grabs the chest, and enters the cave. With that said, largely every Squeak member, when they grab the chest, does a little taunting laugh of some sort. That usually gives you enough leeway time to get up to them and actually damage them, causing them to drop the chest. So, you're never really out of luck with grabbing the chest from them until they're in the cave, and even then you have plenty of opportunities to get it back. It's just if you lose while in the cave that you're out of luck for that stage visit. So this level here, the second room in specific, is going to have an enemy we've seen before in the LP, Naughties. Naughties give you the sleep ability, which we actually got the ability scroll for last time, so I might as well talk about it. Sleep as an ability does what it says in the tin. Kirby goes to sleep and just kind of nods off. The ability scroll doesn't change what the ability itself does overall, but what it does do is add a healing effect to the actual sleep. Which, if you ever have enough naughties in a row like this, hey, pretty easy way to heal. Only big thing is you'll need to probably eject whatever ability you already had for it, which, hit or miss on whether or not you like that. This isn't the only game where sleep causes a healing effect. I think Forgotten Land apparently even has that to my knowledge. But it really kind of depends on which game you're playing for that to be a thing. It's nice enough to have, but there's better ways to heal within the game, given that usually every stage has at least one actual healing item in that, on top of my usual recommended advice of have at least one healing item stored up on the bottom screen, just in case, you know? The stage also gets kind of devious about its chest placements. In specific, you end up kind of winding all over the place in the main room here. But in specific, after our brief visit back to the main room here, we're going to get to a room with a couple of cannons. Progress is upwards, but if you want to get all three treasure chests here, you want to go downwards, because otherwise you're locked out of getting at least one of them until another visit. I want to say on my first playthrough, this might have been one of the longer stages for me to figure out how to get all the chests. Mind you, you could go out of the way to go get, like, hammer elsewhere and come back here for it, but if you want to get it done in a streamlined method without relying on mixes or going to another level, this is the best way to do it. Also, I'm only just now kind of realizing that stone's not really in this game. And mind you, metal functionally is the same, because I think its ground pound can also take care of, like, hammer posts and the like stone can in other games. But I dislike metal so much more than I dislike stone. It's not even funny. Go up here, by the way, to hit this switch to get the next chest, and then it's just pretty straight going from here for the rest of the stage. So, the next set of credits in the game's end credits is the artwork support team, so secondary artists, checkers, probably smaller art roles to begin with. There's only 3 people credited in that. Sachiko Nakamichi, Kiyomi Oe, and Yasuko Takahashi. Sachiko Nakamichi technically started in a special thanks role in a text adventure game on the Super Nintendo, but their first actual role on an art team was as the package and manual designer for Wario Land 3, which we'll get to eventually. They then worked on things like package art for Dr. Mario 64, artwork for Wario Land 4, package design for Metroid Fusion, artwork for the original Fire Emblem in the West, rather, so Fire Emblem 7. Starfy 2, they did stuff for the manual. Pokemon Emerald, they did some artwork. They're just all over a lot of Nintendo's artwork stuff, starting from the Game Boy Advance onwards. Notable instances being like Mother 3, Mario vs. Donkey Kong 2, Pokemon Diamond and Pearl, Battle Revolution, the Mystery Dungeon Explorers games on the DS, Phantom Hourglass, Superstar Ultra, Squeak Squad, Advance Wars, Days of Ruin, Shadows of Almia, Heart Gold, Soul Silver, all the way up until around 2017, where their most recent instances of working for stuff are doing artwork for Fire Emblem Heroes, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, Kirby Robobot, Detective Pikachu, Pokemon Sun and Moon, all that jazz. Kiyomi Oe, on the other hand, much smaller resume in that regard. They started doing manual stuff for F-Zero Climax on the GBA, then some stuff for WarioWare Twisted. This Ranger, Diamond, Pearl, and Battle Revolution they did artwork for and artwork support for, and that's the latest they have entries on. But they also did stuff for, say, Mystery Dungeon Blue and Red Rescue Team, Troze, DK King of Swing, things like that. Yasuko Takahashi, on the other hand, did some work in the late 90s as a debugger and production support on a game on the Saturn and PlayStation. But their more relevant roles onwards on being an art team member are on Game & Watch Gallery 4 Beyond, doing things like manual design for Metroid Fusion, package design for Starfy 2, Pokemon Pinball Ruby and Sapphire they did art for, Starfy 3 and Zero Mission they were on the package design team, Super Princess Peach, DK King of Swing artwork and manual design, Pokemon Ranger. After Squeak Squad, their more notable things are doing in-betweens on things like Tales of Vesperia. They did artwork for Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. Pokemon Sword, they did some art for Brilliant Diamond, New Pokemon Snap, same deal. They're still working on Pokemon artwork to this day, notably doing work for Legends Arceus, Scarlet and Violet, as well as Detective Pikachu Returns. From there on, in the credits, we actually reach both the special thanks as well as the North American side of the development. Let's start with the special thanks, because that's a pretty quick go over just to talk about what they worked on otherwise. In that section is Yoshifumi Yamashita, Akitomo Tanaka, Satoshi Ishida, Chieko Okubikane, Tomohiro Minamura, Hiroshi Fujie, Misako Mori, and Shin Hasegawa. Starting off with Yoshifumi Yamashita, looking at their resume otherwise, they're largely involved in localization by the looks, considering they're largely only in special thanks outside of localizing Bionic Commando Rearmed. They're also credited in special thanks sections for things like Sacred Stones and Amazing Mirrors, so they're probably over helping with wording checks, I would assume. Akitomo Tanaka is a tester largely for things like Rune Factory Tied to Destiny back in the PS3. Otherwise, there's a special thanks for this as well as Sacred Stones. Satoshi Ishida is largely in special thanks sections, but when they're not doing that, they're doing some graphic stuff here and again, but they're largely in PR department, so they were probably involved in PR and advertising for this game in specific, I would guess then. Chieko Obikane does a lot of debugging in QA, so probably gave some advice, did some assisting QA here and then, working on projects like Earthbound and the like, but they're also, again, involved in PR nowadays, like Canvas Curse and Superstar Ultra. Tomohiro Minamura is largely in special thanks sections, but given that they're also in original game supervisor role for Smash Ultimate, they've probably just been involved in PR and adjacent work since. Hiroshi Fujie, again, largely just in special thanks sections, but they're also involved in some packaging and manual departments, especially when it comes to Melee, so they probably gave some advice when it came to how to lay out certain things. Misako Mori, only in special thanks sections, as far as I can tell, for Canvas Curse This and Pokemon Ranger, so probably just helped in some form or manner across. And Shin Hasegawa, again, is either a coordinator, technical support member, or advisor when not in special thanks sections, so they probably gave some engine side support, I would assume, there. And from here, we'll talk about the localization efforts and all that jazz. With that said, one of these chests, I think it's the large one, contains the secret level key for World 6 here. So before we move on to the next main stage, we're going to go handle that. And if memory serves, this stage starts off with a chest that can be kind of hard to get if you're not used to a specific movement type. Specifically, we're going to need to race another bunch of destroying blocks down to a chest, otherwise you lose access to it until you restart the stage. Wheel, I've talked about loving before, and on a straightaway, it is really handy. But sometimes the platforming segments like this where you need to race something, you really do need to learn to master its turning radius and all that. And it's very easy to make mistakes at the very last second that just cost you whatever collectible you're trying to get. I think I beat that there with a good, 10 seconds to spare, maybe 5 seconds, but it gets really strict in some instances. That's probably one of my least favorite things about Kirby, is the out-of-nowhere precision it can require of you, but usually by endgame I don't mind that as much because it's... The fun thing about Kirby, I guess is a way to put it, is that it's easy to play, but at times hard to master, which I don't think the series gets enough credit for, outside of, say, True Arena adjacent topics. Mind you, it also largely depends on what game you're playing in the series, in that respect, because say, Superstar/Superstar Ultra can be tough to master because of the guard on top of just how many abilities there are and what they can do if you're trying to get everything done, especially a True Arena adjacent topic. But say Nightmare in Dreamland, pretty easy to master largely unless you're going to a speedrunning context. That's another Waddle Dee, by the way, that can be really tough to catch up to in time depending on the ability you're using, and especially given they lead you into having Wheel there, I've missed that due to dumb mistakes in the past. So, the localization team for this is specifically Nathan Bildorf and Tim O'Leary, who, if you've played a Nintendo game since around the turn of the millennia, for either person, you've seen them in games before. Bildorf started as a text editor for the original Paper Mario, but is basically over every notable Nintendo release from 2000 beyond to this year. They were on the localization management for Breath of the Wild, Thousand Year Door Remake, they were a character voice, same with Mario Kart World, funnily enough. Famicom Detective Club, they were localization management, Age of Calamity. Really, I could just spend days listing basically every notable release they've done since, but they're in there. Same with Tim O'Leary, really, who started on localization support for Paper Mario, Mario Tennis, and Mario Party 3, but then did things like North American localization for Melee, Wind Waker, Metroid Prime 1 and 2, I think interpretation and all that jazz. They're all over these projects. If you've played a Nintendo game the last 20 years, congrats, you've played a game they've probably worked on. So level 5 here in World 6 is notably a mini-boss rush against the elite members of the Squeaks. We're going to start off by fighting Spinny, then I believe we fight Storo, then Doc, all in that order, and each of their rooms all have a large chest in them. You really want to have an ability that's really good at comboing enemies here. The breath attacks are especially very good for this, but so is high jump, because then you can just keep them locked in a corner, you don't need to worry about too much. With that said, if they grab the chest and get into their cavern, things can get a little dicey there, as they need to worry about the extra power-ups on top of the other Squeaks they're working alongside. If you're getting low on HP here, thankfully, the fact that basically every Squeak drops HP items, if you combo them like this, you're in pretty good shape. This is a level where if you overthink it, it's honestly harder than it is if you just try to kind of power through it like this. But it also largely depends on what abilities you like and what you might have on hand. But thankfully, they also give you a good amount of abilities between every single fight. And there's usually at least one there that's really good for the fight in question. While I go finish off Doc, worth noting the next credits list in the game staff is the North American Localization Management, who is another set of 3 very familiar names if you've played a lot of Nintendo games across the 2000s. Jeff Miller, Leslie Swan, and William/Bill Trinan. Jeff started work with battle cards on the Super Nintendo, special thanks, and then they did the same with Weapon Lord. But their first notable thing for what we're doing here is they were the localization manager for Hey You Pikachu, and then they did a lot of localization and special thanks since. Again, I could list so many games from across the 2000s, and you probably would recognize at least one that they worked on. Leslie Swan, similar deal, but they were also notably the voice of Princess Peach for a good amount of the series there. Their first localization and screen text adjacent role was back on Super Mario 64. William Trinan started as a localizer on Hey You Pikachu and has worked on various Mario and Pokemon games up until 2017, where they seemingly left NOA. Boss of World 6 here is the leader of the Squeaks. This is Daroach. In fact, I think in Japanese, the Squeak Squad's called the Daroach Gang, just outright. Daroach is a surprisingly complicated boss compared to a lot of the other ones, and he really tests your reactions. He's gonna teleport all over the place like we've seen a lot of other bosses do in various other games. But what he does from there really depends on what his mood is. He can either charge up his beam and send out a giant beam that can freeze you outright. He can throw bombs out of his cape. He can also use a little star rod to throw 3 stars out that'll bounce around the room a couple of times. High jump is a very good ability here, like I mentioned, I think, earlier in the LP, because it's very good against airborne bosses like him and Bobo. So if you can get it for this fight, which I think is pretty easy to do, given I think it spawns either in this stage or in the previous one, you're in pretty good shape. So we finally fought off the leader of the Squeaks, and it's only World 6, and we're not at the end game. Weird. I guess we just got a victory lap then? At last, the Squeaks are in sight, and Kirby is closing in. His precious shortcake is within reach! What in the world? Meta Knight swoops down and nabs the treasure. In a flash, he sails through the star door, leaving Kirby behind. The star door will never open without the 5 star seals. Kirby carefully places the 5 star seals in the door and... the lock breaks and the star door opens. Now for the cake! So yeah, in one of the game's weirder moments, in order to actively progress into World 7, you need to have found the 5 star seal treasures we've been finding throughout the game. Just in case you missed one to list where they are exactly, there's one in Stage 1 of Nature Notch, Stage 2 of Cushy Cloud, Stage 2 of Jam Jungle, Stage 1 of Vocal Volcano, and the final is in Ice Island's 2nd stage. They are always in the large chest within those worlds in specific. I don't remember on my first playthrough if I actively had them all at this point. I'm going to assume I missed at least one just because of my I just want to go through the game mentality I largely had at the time. But it's pretty easy to miss one in the case you didn't go back for a large chest that a Squeak maybe got away with in a given stage. But having all 5 allows us to access World 7 here. This is Secret Sea, where if the name doesn't make it immediately obvious, is going to be where a large chunk of the very water-based levels are going to be in this game. Water levels get a lot of shit in a lot of other platforming series. Kirby, I think, largely has pretty fun ones, only because you always have a way to fight back, and the pace of the platforming never really changes in them. Mind you, I've largely just been never been too put off by specific level gimmicks in a lot of games like this, at least a generalized version of them. Water levels, sewer levels, ice levels, and the like have never really bothered me like I know they might some others. There's just times where maybe a specific level itself either feels off or can be a little bland, depending on which aesthetic and all that and how they handle it. In the meanwhile, the second to last credit set actually here in the game's dev staff are the producers, who are largely just the funders, but hey, they make some good decision making here and again in some cases. There are 3 main producers for the game: Yasushi Adachi, Masayoshi Tanimura, and Kensuke Tanabe. I think I've talked about most of them in some form or manner over the years, but just to talk about them in specific. Yasushi Adachi started on Beast Busters in the arcade as a special thanks, but then was a front designer for Savage Rain. They worked on Sam's Show 64 as a producer. They were SNK staff in Capcom vs. SNK and both versions Pro. Special thanks to Sacred Stone's producer for Flagship in general across a lot of their reign. Game Republic special thanks for Folklore. Their most recent credits are an executive manager for Shadow Labyrinth, Overlord, Escape from Nazareth, they were on dev support, and they were a co-producer for Sam Show's Neo Geo collection. But with that, I'm going to need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in Part 6, we're going to progress through Secret Sea and probably even enter the end game. See you guys then.